welcome to Corinne's Picks. I'm your host, Corinne Basabe. Today we have a wonderful artist. We have Zach Seeger. Welcome to Corinne's Picks.
Thanks, Corinne.
Zach's work has been shown throughout the country. He's in prominent collections. He's been a teacher. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to talk to you about your work.
Thank you. I'm really excited too. Before
we get into your work, tell us a little bit about your work.
Well, my work right now, I'm a painter, and I often kind of change my styles and my focus. I'm currently focused on athletes, tennis players and soccer players, but my work has evolved kind of over time. I'm kind of a physical, visceral painter. I've worked in different ways, kind of a larger format. I've worked in small representational things and more abstract ways of working.
You know, I'm so glad that you used the term visceral. You know, I looked at some of the paintings of athletes, and they really are really powerful. The use of color and movement. A lot of times people, describe jazz as something that is similar to color. Some people say that when they hear music,
mm-hmm.
that is also a way of seeing color. But when I look at your paintings, I would have never paired the use of color and athleticism in that way. I mean, the images are just incredible.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, the ones that we're going to see in the show today are some of your watercolors and your tapestry, because those were, my favorite.
Yeah.
You should come back and we will revisit the athletes.
Sounds great.
So tell us a little bit about what is the intent in your paintings? Are you trying to capture something, or basically this series just vary?
I think it varies, but there's an emotive thread throughout all of them. And you were talking about music and those pieces in particular. I've always admired Fela Kuti, and they were kind of an inspiration at that time for that. And I have a sports background. I played a lot of sports. I played college football. And I think, it was in the more recent work with the kind of depiction of athletes, there is something similar to, again, the kind of parallels between athletes and artists, the kind of routine and practice that's done in the studio. Something that is emotionally charged, it's physical, there's a level of endurance. And I think that I am about process in my work, regardless of which mode I'm working in, even if it's watercolor. And I want to kind of share that joy, the joy I have for color, and also in the process of making something.
And my background is, I'm West Indian of Caribbean, and I immediately was drawn to the bright colors.
Mm-hmm.
They almost look musical, and I'm so glad that you actually said that it was Fela Kuti, because I'm very, very familiar with his work.
Yeah, sure.
And as you know, the Caribbean culture is similar, comes from Africa, basically. I also like what you said in terms of comparing the discipline of being an artist to that of being an athlete, because I would agree with you, because there is there's a zone you have to get into sometimes to really finish a piece. Sometimes it's effortless, and because when you're in the zone, and I hear athletes talk about the same thing in terms of that deep concentration and knowingness to be able to perform optimally.
Yeah, I think that whether it's like the sort of channeling, like there's a transcendent quality to it. It's the kind of the rising kind of cacophony of the whole thing with what I'm making, like kind of parallels the action of it and all coming together. There's once things are in that kind of physical movement, I actually do, go into the zone, and then, I'm painting for hours, and then I come out of it, and, here I am looking at this painting I've been working on. There's something similar.
Let's look at this first piece. My favorite pieces of yours are the tapestries, right? Tell us about this piece. You can look in the camera. Tell us a little bit more about the content.
So it's the content is, first of all, to avoid that question and just talk about the scale of it. So it's
Okay,
10 feet
okay.
by 12 feet. And when I was working on these tapestries, I was working on a ladder. And so the kind of labor involved in it also, I was doing these pieces at, this piece in particular, at a residency in Vermont. And I had been coming from a studio in upstate New York. And so this is kind of my world, fictionalized to some degree, but my backyard in upstate New York in my studio, which was in a very small shed. And I was doing large pieces at the time, but I was able to kind of open up a little bit with this. So that's where the imagery is coming from
And
in that painting.
what is the medium? Like what materials are you
It's
using
oil.
for the? It's
Yeah,
oil and
it's
canvas.
oil and canvas.
Is
Yep.
the canvas just one sheet of canvas, or is it sewn like a traditional?
It's a
tapestry
drop
quilt?
cloth that I primed. So I was able to find some drop cloths that were actually just canvas, and I primed them with gesso and painted on them. And just when I was working on them, stapling them right to the wall and working on them. But then when I've displayed them, they've been tacked up. Sometimes we had talked about the kind of exhibition To Die For, where there were multiple of the pieces, and I did sew some of them together.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So, is it like a planned piece, or you just are enveloped by that large piece of drop cloth, and it's like whatever comes out as it?
I think it's like, going back to the jazz reference or Fela Kuti, or, there's something intuitive, but it's what I'm reading, what I'm listening to at that time, world affairs, or something that is like sending me in a particular direction, whether it's kind of historical or reactionary or something to some degree, something. I have like a notion of what it is, and then it just seems to kind of serendipitously kind of pull together in the
Look,
imagery.
I mean, the objects seem very dense. I mean, there's a lot
Yeah.
going on in that image.
Yeah.
Can we see the next piece? Maybe you could tell us a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Those are wonderful. That last image was wonderful because you could see
Right.
you could see the scale,
Yeah.
how large it is.
And it pretty taxing piece to like bounce around on the ladder, moving the ladder around quickly, trying to work spontaneously with this painting. So part of this painting, so it's an homage to one of my teachers, and he had done this kind of odd but somewhat haunting, I don't know if it was a premonition, but he was in his painting, he was in the foreground, so he's in the boat.
Mm-hmm.
But in his painting, he's in the foreground, his head looking, earnestly at the viewer, and there's a boat of rabbis landing on the shore. And so it's kind of a tribute.
Yeah, I really wish I could see this one in person because it
Yeah.
really doesn't do it justice seeing it, in a small screen.
Yeah, it
Can we
loses
see
its
the-
scale.
Can we see the next one? Oh my God, this is wonderful. That is just wonderful. Tell us a little
Thank
bit about
you.
this exhibition.
So this exhibition was at a place in Brooklyn called Public Address, where actually part of what's not in the documentation of it was the pieces were, it's kind of a squarish space, and so pieces were stapled together, sewn together, so it creates this environment. But there was a multiple day exhibition, so I had a dancer and I had a poet at the same time that were kind of doing their own thing within the space, directed somewhat by me, or prompted by the space and the work. It was a great experience. Again, it's like there's something with the space itself had these kind of round columns that framed it nicely, but I went around them. And I think that worked well with some of the kind of vertical iconography that's in the paintings.
Yeah, I love the fact that because of the color palette, it just seems like one piece.
Yeah.
Right? It's
A
meant to be
continuum, yeah.
one piece.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. What about this one?
So this one it's a little squish, but it's a longer piece. And this is in my studio, but I thought like for scale's sake, it would be nice to see it in the studio. And so I feel like the paintings, although they are autonomous and they have their own energy, that they hopefully can adapt to different spaces. And I'm interested in the physicality of the object as well as the imagery and how they're painted. So I just like the idea of this kind of scroll that's kind of coming down, kind of pooling off the wall onto the floor, which I feel like kind of fits the movement of the painting itself. So there's some trees and figures in the trees, and then it's kind of a escape Earth painting.
That's actually really true. In terms of the placement of the painting, helps you to see to be in the painting and see the objects of the painting. Like for example, the trees. So we're going to go to a short commercial break, and we'll be back exploring some more of your wonderful paintings.
Thank you.
Kids!
I don't want to talk about it.
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 Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency.
Kids, you all right?
This family's prepared. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan. Go to nyc.gov/readyny or call 311 for more information.
Did you know dragging chains can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Dear moms and dads, what you have achieved here today is going to help us and our futures. It is why we are coming up on stage to collect your diplomas.
You know it's true.
Mom, love you always.
Everything I do.
When you graduate, they graduate. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free and supportive adult education.
Welcome back to Corinne's Picks. I'm your host, Corinne Basabe. We've been discussing the works of Zach Seeger. Welcome back to Corinne's Picks. We had a short break. I want to continue on the thread of thought in terms of these paintings. We're talking about works you did on canvas in oils, but I was also fascinated by your use of watercolors, quite different.
Yeah, I think that I have painted in watercolor for years, but during the pandemic, it kind of concentrated that just because of confinement and space, but also being a teacher and teaching watercolor, but something just about the confinement of space and being really aware of my surroundings, and also linking the colors of my surrounding space to my previous work in watercolor to oil.
I love the fact that as an artist, you do so many things and you're so open. I think some people, there's different, ideas about art in terms of, some people like to stick to one thing because you lose your audience if you go to something else. But, for many of us, I think art is a journey.
Yeah.
An adventure.
Yeah, for sure.
And I sometimes trying to work with a different medium keeps it, really interesting and keeps the challenge alive. So let's look at some more images. I think we have another image of your your paintings. Okay, so this is one of your sports series, but in watercolor.
Yes.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about this one. Who is this in the image?
So it's Roger Federer.
Okay.
I don't play tennis. But so I teach at the 92nd Street Y, and I often will take breaks and walk to the park and watch people play tennis. It just really fascinates me. And I think that there are a lot of artists that I admire and I like seeing their work, and there's somehow a connection to that, just the way he moves and how he plays the game. Serena Williams too, another favorite. But something about just the tactility of their game, and I'm just drawn to it.
I think that I would agree, because in that image, the image is very clean and very simple, and I think the focus is on the player and not on the elements of the court or other things around it.
Yeah, I think just kind of letting it breathe a little bit. I like the kind of potential energy that's in painting as well as in sports and in tennis. So I feel like if the kind of movement is forced within a painting, it kind of kills it a little bit. So allowing that kind of potential movement and what energizes a painting.
But in oil, your other oil paintings of sports athletes, it's jumping off the page with the color. But in this one, it's much
more
calmer.
subdued. Yeah.
Right. Okay. The next image, please. So this is what is this about?
So this is outside my former studio in Bushwick, and I just found it, just the abandoned car. So there was, on Flushing, there was always this car that had either blown up or was on fire that was left there for a year, I don't know, and I always passed it. So just this idea of like the life that one inhabits within a car, and which again, this like enclosed space which has its own narrative, just like the walls that are graffitied or just, and also it's very active, like there's either a cement plant or something and people are actively working there, and having a studio there was kind of energizing too, like working alongside that energy. But then the idea of a car, and again, that narrative is not maybe dissimilar to a studio. It's like this enclosed space where you're doing a lot of thinking. It just kind of caught my eye.
How is, working in oils is quite different in working with watercolors. I find watercolors more difficult. How do you find working like these same images but in watercolor?
I think I don't paint correctly in watercolor. I approach it like an oil painter. So I think in both, regardless of like my oil paintings, I spend a lot of time on them, and not that I don't spend that much time on watercolor, but I wanted to have this kind of fresh, kind of instantaneous feel to it regardless. In watercolor, what's beautiful about it is the immediacy of the color. It just like, once you put it on the page, you see it because of the transparency of it. I feel like it has a bad rap or something as far as like it being inflexible, but maybe I'm not doing it right.
Yeah, I find that watercolors, it takes a lot more thought and care. Like you have to respect it a little bit more. You can't necessarily, you have to follow the rule. You can't do what you want to do. You have to do how it's done.
I break the rules.
Oh, okay. Because I find that, if you dip it too much or you don't pat enough, like you can ruin the whole painting. And in trying to correct the painting, you try to wreck the painting too.
I'd say that there's something kind of, jumping into the void about my painting anyway. As far as like oil and watercolor, it's a lot of mixing like on the surface and pushing things around. I think that, again, it's like having that openness of like, okay, what is like an overall feeling or mood of whatever this thing I'm trying to go after. And everything seems to kind of fall in line if I like keep my focus on that particular thing.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think this might be one of my favorite ones of the workout.
Thank you.
This is so beautiful.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit more about this one. The color palette is fantastic. I love the colors.
Thank you. So this is actually from, it's a stolen photograph. I work from a photograph with this one. It's not something that's personal. It's not my photograph. It's by Margaret Chase, who is an excellent photographer. And I met her, and she's an editor for Rizzoli. And she came to a show I had in 2018 called Field Days, and she came to the show, and we were talking painting, and we were talking about Peter Doig and something about reflections. And I started following her on Instagram, and I find her photographs really beautiful, but they have that kind of parallel with Peter Doig's painting. There's something that's tactile, but not kind of willfully trying to alter the image. It's just kind of as is. And so I was just attracted to that particular image and the reflection.
Oh my God, I love the subtlety, the various shades of blue, and
Thanks.
just slight touches of yellow. I love it.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's see another painting.
Okay.
This is really powerful. What is this about? This is the Empire State Building.
Empire State Building in Ukraine colors.
Okay.
So I think in a way it's like there's something, I was kind of joking about like not following the rules with watercolor, but there are kind of artistic don'ts or something. Like with sports, there's something that is so in and of itself kind of powerful and meaningful to the city or the world or this country. And I think that often painters kind of shy away from that particular thing because it's like beyond, it starts to like kind of drift into like a political narrative. And I just think that there's something interesting about watercolor, which is just, paint, water and paper, and depicting something like that that can still kind of hold a particular power that's interesting. So that's kind of where that comes from.
I like it because, I'm somebody who believes strongly about, art and activism as well as art for art's sake.
Yeah.
I think, as artists, we show a mirror to the world and to ourselves. So who are some of your influences in your work or your art? I know you mentioned one person, but who are some of your influences?
I like a lot of different people, and I tend to, so like my background, I wasn't really taught art history. I was taught art history via kind of Marxist history in a way at Binghamton University. But so I just went to the library and I started looking at images. And I think that, maybe in the beginning I had a kind of narrow mind of like as a kid going to the Met and loving Van Gogh and Edvard Munch and various Edward Hopper and different painters. And I think that really the artist who opened the door for me was Francis Bacon. In so many ways, because at first I did not like his paintings at all. It wasn't being disturbed, I just thought they were really ugly, and I couldn't understand why anyone would paint that in particular, but that opened up so many different channels for me. I think that another artist outside of painting is Kenneth Anger, who passed away recently, but his films are magical. And I think that there's a kind of fluidity to his filmmaking visually that I can relate to as a painter. Being able to cover certain topics or deal with certain imagery, but relying on the beauty of the visual.
Okay, so we have another image here. This is really spectacular.
Thanks.
Tell us a little bit about this one.
It's Chelsea.
It's
From the
Chelsea.
street, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so distorted. I can't think of it. So 10th Ave, but I can't, or 11th Ave, but I can't picture which street it's on right now. But I just thought it was, going back to the cars again, there's something about Chelsea and galleries and the artists that are being exhibited in this kind of like modular boxy thing that the cars were kind of mirroring, which drew me to this
Okay,
image.
I think we have one more image left, and then I think we have to end the show.
Okay.
Okay, this is the last image.
Yeah, so it's a little squished. It's actually a longer piece. This was from a photo that I took, again, of the Empire State Building from, I was in an art party up in a building, and I took this photograph. The moon was not that big, but there was something to the kind of atmosphere of it that was reminding me of Paul Klee, and so that's where this painting comes from.
It's almost like, two parts to this painting. I love the color fields of the sky and the moon. That's really wonderful, how that blends together. And then there's, there's this part that's the city.
Yeah.
Okay, we have about 1 minute left.
Okay.
So where's your art going from here? What are you currently working on?
I've been treating sports as kind of current events. And so I've been painting these small studies from soccer and tennis. But I'm getting ready to work on some large, kind of go back to the tapestries to include more pattern with the athletes. So I'm kind of trying to bridge those a little bit.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I definitely would love to have you back sometime.
Great.
And
thanks, Corinne.
We have your contact information in the credits. Okay, so until then.
Thanks, Corinne.